The first thing Station K-41 told me about tomorrow was that the wind would stop at 4:20 in the morning. Not weaken, not shift. Stop. At the time, the anemometer above the station was registering 63 miles per hour. Snow moved over the plateau in hard white sheets, and every steel cable in the tower sang against its anchor. The forecast called for those conditions to continue through noon, but the paper chart on my desk had already recorded a dead calm. The pen line ran straight from 4:20 until 4:27. Then it dropped off the bottom of the scale. 7 minutes of silence, followed by a pressure reading the instrument was not built to measure. I was still trying to decide which part had failed when all 3 cups on the anemometer stopped turning. That happened at exactly 4:20. I should begin with why I was there. My name is Daniel Rusk. For 9 years, I serviced automated weather stations for the Western Climate Survey. Most of them were small, solar-powered units on ranch land or forest roads. I replaced batteries, cleared insects from rain gauges, calibrated thermistors, and drove away. I believed in measurements because measurements did not care what anyone wanted to be true. K-41 was different. It stood 11,000 feet above sea level on Blackglass Plateau, a shelf of volcanic rock in the northern Kestrel Range. The plateau was 3 miles wide and almost perfectly flat. Mountains rose on every side like the rim of a broken bowl, but nothing grew on the black surface except crustose lichen and a few wind-bent shrubs near the southern drop. The station had been established in 1953 to collect high-altitude winter data. Automation reached it late. Ice destroyed the first remote instruments, and the surrounding peaks blocked reliable satellite coverage. Even in 2022, K-41 required a resident observer from November through March. Nobody volunteered for the late January rotation. The previous observer, Mara Vin, had reported migraines and requested an early pickup. Her replacement broke his leg 2 days before departure. I was unmarried, qualified, and foolish enough to mistake isolation for rest. The contract offered 6 weeks of hazard pay and a completion bonus large enough to erase my credit card debt. I accepted before reading the station history. A pilot named Coyle flew me in on a Tuesday morning. The helicopter followed a river valley north, then climbed through a pass so narrow that the rotor washed lifted snow from both walls. Beyond it, the plateau appeared without warning, an enormous dark table under a sky the color of old aluminum. K-41 sat near the center. The main building was a low rectangle of reinforced concrete painted emergency orange, though 50 years of wind had scoured the western wall nearly white. A steel instrument tower rose from the roof. Guy wires disappeared into snowdrifts. 2 fuel tanks, a generator shed, and a round radome completed the compound. No road was visible. From the air, the place looked less like a weather station than a small ship trapped in frozen black water. Coyle circled once before landing. "Where's Vin?" he asked through my headset. "I thought you picked her up." "Not me." The operations email said Mara had left on the previous supply flight. Coyle checked his tablet and found no record of another pilot visiting the plateau in 9 days. We called Survey Dispatch. The satellite connection dropped twice before a coordinator confirmed that Mara had been evacuated by a contract aircraft. She could not provide a tail number. Coyle asked again. The coordinator told him the file was marked complete. He did not like that answer, but weather was closing over the Western Pass. He helped me carry 6 plastic supply cases into the station and inspected the fuel level. Before leaving, he wrote his private radio frequency on the back of my hand. "If dispatch starts sounding stupid, call me," he said. The helicopter lifted at 11:10. I watched it shrink above the southern ridge until the sound disappeared. The plateau became very large. Inside, K41 was warmer and more comfortable than I expected. The main room combined a kitchen, workbench, radio console, and observation desk. A narrow hall led to 2 bunks, a bathroom, a pantry, and the generator controls. Triple-pane windows faced each compass direction. The walls were covered with maps, calibration certificates, and decades of pencil marks left by observers measuring the growth of cracks. The station smelled of diesel heat, instant coffee, and wet wool. Life there was governed by observation times. At 00, 06, 12, and 18 Coordinated Universal Time, the console sounded 2 short tones. The observer went outside regardless of weather, checked the manual thermometers, estimated cloud height, measured new snow on a whiteboard, and returned to compare those values with the automated sensors. Between reports, you cleared rime from the tower, launched a radiosonde balloon, tested the emergency beacon, and logged fuel consumption. Meals, sleep, and phone calls fit into the empty spaces. The routine was intentionally repetitive. In extreme isolation, repetition reveals change. A new vibration in the generator. A door that takes more force to close. A wind vane pointing 5 degrees away from the handheld compass. Small differences become visible because everything else happens in the same order. My first afternoon, I walked the compound and photographed each instrument. Snow squeaked under my boots with the dry, brittle sound it makes far below freezing. The plateau extended so evenly that distance became difficult to judge. Dark stones 100 yards away looked close enough to pick up. The surrounding peaks appeared painted against the sky. When I stopped walking, the station produced its own weather. Warm exhaust rose from the generator vent and crystallized into a tiny cloud. Ice particles drifted down through sunlight. For a few seconds, K41 stood beneath the only snowfall on the plateau. Then the wind tore the cloud apart. Mara's personal things were gone. Her bunk was made. A clean mug sat upside down beside the sink. The official handover log contained a single line in blue ink. Station operational. New observer expected Tuesday. She had not signed it. My first task was to perform an independent inventory. The automated system collected temperature, humidity, wind, solar radiation, and precipitation every minute. At 6-hour intervals, the observer compared those values with manual instruments and transmitted a coded report. Most of the manual equipment lived in a white louvered shelter 50 yards east of the building. The exception was the barograph. It occupied a glass case on the observation desk. Inside, a stack of evacuated metal capsules expanded and contracted with air pressure. A mechanical arm transferred that movement to a pin resting against a paper chart wrapped around a rotating drum. The drum made 1 revolution every 24 hours. Modern stations kept barographs mostly for redundancy and tradition. K41's was an old Richard Frere's instrument with a black enamel base and a brass clockwork key. Its weekly chart should have shown the pressure trace from Monday morning onward. Instead, the paper was blank behind the pen and marked ahead of it. A jagged blue line circled the portion of the drum representing Tuesday night through Wednesday morning. According to that line, pressure would hold steady until midnight, fall sharply at 2, recover at 6, then rise through noon. I removed the chart. There was no carbon paper, no second pen, no obvious way for the line to have appeared ahead of the mechanism. The ink was dry. I assumed Mara had advanced the drum during calibration and forgotten to replace the paper. I fitted a new chart, set the time, wound the clock, and photographed the installation for my report. At midnight, the new chart showed 12 hours of future pressure. I noticed because the mechanical pin had reached the top edge of the mark, already waiting for it. The old line and the fresh line joined without a gap. I tapped the glass. The pin trembled, then continued along the path. My training offered several explanations: capillary action, vibration, a damaged clock gear, an observer too tired to understand what he was seeing. None explained dry ink in front of a pen. I changed the chart again and locked the case. When I woke at 5:30, Wednesday's pressure had already been drawn through Thursday morning. I called the regional office. My supervisor, Halpern, told me to disconnect the mechanical chart and rely on the digital sensor. He sounded distracted. When I mentioned Mara's missing transport record, he paused long enough for the satellite delay to become uncomfortable. "Ven is no longer your concern," he said. "Did she reach the clinic?" "Her rotation ended." "That's not what I asked." He repeated that her file was complete and ended the call. I removed the barograph pen and placed it in a drawer. The following morning, the chart had been marked in pencil. The line was thin and uneven, but it recorded the same pressure fall shown on the digital forecast for the next day. At 7:10, it spiked upward. Beside the spike, someone had written 3 small words: "Do not transmit." I recognized the handwriting. It was mine. I compared it with the inventory sheet I had completed the day before. The capital D leaned backward. The crossbar of the T extended too far to the right. I had written the warning, or someone who formed letters exactly as I did. At 7 o'clock the next morning, I prepared the scheduled observation. Pressure was falling, just as the chart predicted. Wind had shifted northwest. Cloud cover had thickened above the western ridge. The values were ordinary for a winter front. I entered them into the console. The warning on the chart sat 7 minutes ahead. "Do not transmit." At 7:09, a burst of static came over the high-frequency radio. Beneath it, I heard a human voice speaking quickly. I could not understand the words. At 7:10, the digital barometer jumped from 693 millibars to 812, then returned. The same impossible spike rose on the chart. The console accepted the observation and displayed ready to send. I hesitated with my finger above the key. There was no professional reason to withhold it. Instruments glitch. We flag the value and transmit the rest. Mountain forecasts depended on our reports, especially pilots crossing the range. I sent the observation. Every light in the station went out. The generator continued running. I could hear it through the western wall. But the electrical hum vanished from the room, along with the ventilation fan and the radio hiss. Outside, the wind stopped. Snow hung in the air beyond the windows. Individual flakes remained suspended a few feet above the ground, motionless. Spindrift froze in pale streamers along the roof edge. The guy wires stopped singing. Even the clouds seemed fixed. The clock above the observation desk read 7 hours, 10 minutes, and 12 seconds. Its second hand did not move. The barograph drum continued turning. Without a pen, a pencil line drew itself across the paper. It dropped straight down off the scale. The high-frequency radio clicked on. My voice came through the speaker. "K41, cancel the observation. You sent it too early." The signal was weak, but the words were clear. "Who is this?" I asked. The radio played the sound of my own breathing. Then my voice said, "It's Thursday here." The power returned. Wind struck the station so hard that a metal cup flew from the drying rack. The clock jumped to 7 hours, 10 minutes, and 13 seconds. Snow moved again. I called regional operations and told them I had experienced a power interruption. Halpern checked the telemetry. According to his system, K41 had remained online. What about the report I sent? We don't have a report from you. The transmission log on my console was empty. Halpern asked whether I had taken the altitude medication in the first aid cabinet. I told him I did not need it. He suggested I take it anyway. Before ending the call, I asked him what day it was. He said Wednesday. The calendar on the station wall said Thursday. For several minutes, I stood between the two calendars and tried to decide which one I had changed. My phone showed Thursday, January 27th. So did my watch and the station computer. The GPS receiver on the instrument console reported day 27 of the year. But the time signal broadcast from Fort Collins announced 0 hours, 17 minutes, Coordinated Universal Time, January 26. Wednesday, I called Halpern back. The satellite phone would not connect. Email did. My outgoing message appeared in the queue with a red warning. System date exceeds server date by 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 42 seconds. I opened the station observation archive. Every automatic reading collected since the power interruption was stamped Thursday. Regional telemetry still showed Wednesday and listed K41 as unavailable. The building had moved 1 day ahead without moving a foot. That sentence sounds ridiculous. I know. At the time, I refused to think of it that way. I blamed a coordinated clock fault. The GPS receiver could be spoofed. My phone and computer had synchronized with the station network. A bad timestamp in the operating system might explain everything except the radio announcement and the unmoving snow. I took the handheld GPS outside. The wind had returned to 40 miles per hour. A lid of gray cloud pressed down on the plateau. The receiver found 8 satellites and placed me within 6 feet of the station door. Its date remained Thursday. I switched the radio to Coil's private frequency. Survey 41 to Coil. Do you copy? Static rolled through the speaker. I called again. His voice arrived faintly. Who is this? Daniel at K41. You aren't due to call until tomorrow. I gripped the radio harder. What date do you have? Wednesday the 26th. What? It's Thursday here. The signal broke apart. Through the static, I heard Coil ask whether I was injured. No. Listen, I need you to check the observation from 710. Did it reach your weather feed? Negative. Station's showing offline. Can you fly up? He laughed once, without humor. Not with tomorrow's front. Kestrel Pass closes tonight. Earliest window is Friday morning. The front is already here. Sky is clear from my hangar. His signal faded. Before it disappeared, he gave me one instruction. Don't send anything else. That was the same warning written on the chart. I spent the next 2 hours isolating every clock source. I disconnected the network switch, pulled the GPS antenna, and rebooted the observation console from a recovery drive. The date remained Thursday. I opened the radio cabinet and traced the wiring. Nothing had been added. I searched the ceiling, the generator room, and both bunks for a transmitter that might explain my recorded voice. In the rear bunk, I found Mara's field notebook. It had been hidden behind the wall heater. The cover was warped, and several pages were stuck together by moisture. Her entries began 3 weeks earlier in the concise style of a professional observer. January 3rd. Rymon Tower, 8 millimeters. Solar sensor recalibrated. January 5th. Satellite uplink intermittent. Reported to regional. January 7th. Barograph advancing ahead of drum again. The entries changed after that. January 9th. 23 hours, 59 minutes, 12 seconds between local console and network. January 10th. Heard Foster on upper sideband. Foster rotated out in 2014. January 11th. Future observations must not be transmitted. Transmission lock station to observation time. January 12th. It is not forecasting. It is making the measurement true. Several pages contained columns of times. Most recorded a date difference of 1 day. Some showed 2. Beside each, Mara had written the same phrase. Storm cycle. Her final complete entry was dated January 18th. The station advances when tomorrow's report is sent today. Regional cannot see us until the date catches up. At the comm interval, both records overlap. Old K, 41 opens for 7 minutes. Foster says the correction is below. The next page had been torn out. On the back cover, Mara had written, "If the wind stops, do not look at the tower." I read the notebook twice. Then I put on my parka and looked at the tower. Nothing stood there. Ice feathered the ladder and the guy wires. The 3 anemometer cups spun normally. A red obstruction light blinked at the top. Below the tower, a line of footprints crossed the snow. They began halfway between the station and the instrument shelter. No prints led onto the plateau. The first was simply there, a deep left boot mark in fresh snow. From it, the trail continued toward the tower. The tread pattern matched the insulated boots issued to resident observers. The footprints circled the tower once, then ended beneath the lowest ladder rung. I called Mara's name. Wind tore the word away. From inside the steel tower, somebody knocked 3 times. I went back into the station and locked the door. Mara's notebook mentioned Old K, 41. The station history on the wall said the original 1953 building had been destroyed by an avalanche in 1964. That made little sense on a flat plateau. The nearest slope capable of producing an avalanche was more than a mile away. I searched the maintenance files. The official plans showed the main building on a 6-foot concrete foundation. A set of plumbing drawings showed something else. A vertical pressure equalization pipe descending 28 feet beneath the observation room. It connected to a space labeled Annex K. No access route appeared on the plan. I found it under the pantry shelves. The lowest shelving unit had fresh scratches around its anchors. After removing 4 bolts, I dragged it away from the wall. A square steel hatch lay beneath, sealed with a wheel handle. White paint covered an older warning embossed in the metal. I scraped it clean. Synoptic lead facility. No entry during negative interval. The wheel would not turn. I checked Mara's notebook for the words negative interval. They appeared once, beside a pressure value of -46 millibars. Atmospheric pressure cannot be negative. 0 is a vacuum. At 2 o'clock Thursday afternoon, according to the station, the western cloud deck reached the plateau. Coyle's front arrived exactly when his Wednesday forecast said it would arrive the following day. Snow erased the instrument shelter in less than an hour. Wind rose past 70. The tower cups became a blur. The automated gauge reported falling pressure, and the barograph's invisible pencil continued drawing Friday's line. I did not transmit the afternoon observation. Regional operations called at 2:15. Halpern's voice came through with a full 1-second satellite delay. K, 41, you missed a mandatory report. What date is it there? Daniel, submit the observation. Tell me the date. He sighed. Wednesday. I explained the discrepancy as calmly as I could. I read him the GPS date, the server warning, and Mara's notes. When I reached the part about the station moving ahead, he interrupted. Do not discuss internal station irregularities over an open line. You know about this. Enter the values on your console and transmit. Mara wrote that transmitting locks the station into the future. Ven was medically unfit when she wrote those notes. Where is she? Halpern did not answer. The barograph case clicked. A new sentence appeared in pencil along Friday's chart. Halpern is reading the old log. Over the phone, paper rustled. Halpern said, "Daniel, there is no annex beneath K41. I had not mentioned the annex. What is the synoptic lead facility?" The line went quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Submit a full observation at 1800. Stay inside during the calm. A recovery team will reach you when the date realigns." What happens during the calm? Do not go below. He ended the call. I took every printed station history from the wall and spread them across the workbench. Most repeated the same public facts. One binder, issued in 1978, still contained carbon copies of correspondence from the original program. K41 had not been built only to observe weather. In 1952, military forecasters discovered that reports from Blackglass Plateau sometimes arrived on regional teletype circuits several hours before they were transmitted. The lead varied with pressure. During intense winter storms, it reached almost one full day. The synoptic lead facility was constructed to exploit the effect. Mechanical instruments in an underground annex recorded future conditions. Observers passed those readings to aviation forecasters, who quietly improved route predictions across the range. The program ended in February 1964. The final memo described a negative pressure event and loss of synchronization between Annex K and the surface station. 4 observers were officially killed in an avalanche. No bodies were recovered. At the bottom, somebody had typed a sentence, then struck it out with black ink. The impression remained visible on the carbon copy. Personnel continued transmitting from +1 day. I tuned the high-frequency radio to the frequency listed in the memo. At first, I heard only the storm. Then a woman said my name. "Daniel Rusk, surface observer. If you hear this, answer with yesterday's date." I pressed the transmitter. Wednesday, January 26th. Static broke open. Several voices spoke at once, too faint to separate. The woman returned. "My name is Mara Van. Do not make the 1800 report. Where are you?" "Below, but not yet." "That doesn't mean anything. It will at 4:20. Her signal drifted. I asked whether she could reach the hatch. I told her I had found it beneath the pantry. "The hatch opens when pressure crosses 0, she said. "You will have 7 minutes. Go down. Find the master chart. Change tomorrow before the pen reaches it." "How?" The storm swallowed part of her reply. I heard only 3 words. "Do not look." Then my own voice came over the radio. It was the same voice I had heard that morning, but closer and more desperate. "Mara, he's already looked at the tower." The obstruction light outside stopped blinking. Something began climbing down. I moved away from the window before I saw what reached the bottom. The tower ladder rang one section at a time. The sound descended with slow, evenly spaced impacts. Metal shook. Ice fell against the roof. Whatever was climbing used both hands and both feet, but it paused at every platform as an observer would pause to check an instrument. The barograph drew another line. On Friday's chart, pressure fell below the printed scale at 420 and returned at 427. A narrow shape had been sketched between those times. It looked like the tower. A smaller shape hung from its side. The ladder stopped ringing. Boots crossed the roof. They moved over the observation room, compressed snow creaking beneath each step. The ceiling bowed slightly under the weight. A hand brushed ice from the skylight above the hall. I kept my eyes on the floor. The station door opened inward 2 inches and struck the deadbolt. I had locked it, but the outer handle did not turn. The door simply leaned against the frame as if the pressure outside had changed. A thread of snow blew through the gap. "Daniel," Mara said over the radio. I nearly answered before realizing the radio was off. Her voice came from the other side of the door. "Open it." The hatch is frozen from below. The voice was accurate. It carried the slight rasp I had heard in her transmission and the clipped rhythm of someone trained to conserve words on radio. But it repeated the sentence with exactly the same pauses. Open it. The hatch is frozen from below. I pulled the inner storm shutter across the window without looking outside. The person on the porch moved to the eastern window. Gloved fingers tapped the glass 4 times. They moved to the southern window and tapped again. At the western window, the tapping became the coded rhythm of a standard observation sequence. Temperature, pressure, wind, visibility. The figure was taking readings from me. At 5:12, it returned to the tower. I heard it climb past the roof and continue upward until the red obstruction light began blinking again. I checked the automatic cameras. The tower camera had recorded 1 frame every minute. In each image, a person stood on a different rung. The body was hidden beneath a white hooded parka layered with rime. Its face always turned away. In the final frame, the figure reached the top platform and looked down at the camera. I closed the image before it finished loading. The file name contained Friday's date. At 6 in the evening, the observation console sounded its reminder. I ignored it. At 6:05, Halpern called. "We need the report, Daniel. I'm not sending anything from this station. The front is developing faster than forecast. 2 medical flights need upper air data. It's already over me. Tomorrow's storm is here today. That is why your measurement matters." He told me to enter the values manually. I asked whether he had heard the observers trapped in +1 day. "Old radio recordings," he said. "One of them is Mara. Mara Venn was extracted. By what aircraft?" He had no answer. I unplugged the console from the network. The screen remained on. Its internal battery had been removed during the inventory. I opened the lower panel and confirmed the empty compartment. The display continued prompting for the observation. Pressure values filled themselves in. Temperature, wind, visibility. Each matched the instruments at that moment. The cursor moved to transmit. I pulled the power cable from the wall. The cursor selected yes. I tore the satellite modem from its rack. Fiber snapped. The console chimed. Observation accepted. The station lights failed again. This time, the wind did not stop. It increased. The building shifted against its foundation. Cupboards opened. A crack traveled across the western window with a sound like a rifle shot. The generator raced beyond its governor, while every electrical device inside remained dead. The wall clock advanced through an entire day in less than a minute. Thursday night passed. The hands spun through Friday morning, afternoon, and evening. Outside, darkness strobed against the shutters. Night, gray daylight, night again. Snow accumulated and vanished in pulses. The barograph drum turned steadily through all of it. Friday's future line moved under the fixed point where the pin should have been. When 420 crossed that point, the hatch wheel in the pantry turned by itself. 1/4 rotation. Then the station returned to normal. The clock read Thursday, 6:06 in the evening. Only 1 second had passed. The console was dark. The transmission log showed no report. But the barograph had gained another chart beneath the first. It was labeled Saturday. Halpern called a 3rd time. I did not answer. For the rest of the evening, I prepared to go below. I found a climbing harness, 2 headlamps, a coil of rope, a pry bar, and a portable oxygen meter. I packed water, chemical lights, the station first aid kit, and Mara's notebook. I removed the mechanical clock from the barograph and tested its alarm spring. If both dates overlapped for only 7 minutes, I needed a timer independent of the station electronics. I also found Mara's missing page. It had been folded into the back of the 1964 binder. Her handwriting covered both sides. She described entering Annex K during a calm interval 9 days earlier. The hatch opened onto a ladder descending through concrete. At the bottom, she found the original observation room preserved behind an airlock. Its instruments were operating despite having no power. For voices spoke from different years over the radio. In the center of the room stood the master barograph. Unlike the surface instrument, it did not measure pressure at one time. For pins rested against one wide drum. One marked the present. One marked the previous day. One marked the next. The fourth traced values with no date at all. Mara had tried to stop the next day pin. The moment she touched it, the annex moved forward. The hatch closed before she could climb out. She spent what felt like 11 hours below, listening to the surface station operate one day behind her. At the next calm interval, she reached the ladder and emerged. The station was empty. Her own tracks crossed the plateau, but she could not see herself making them. Through the windows, she watched food disappear from shelves and pages fill the handover log. She heard my helicopter arrive one day before it should have. That was when she understood. The observer outside my station was not a dead person or an intruder. It was Mara, displaced by one day and unable to interact except during pressure failures. When she spoke outside my door, the station played her words at the wrong time. But the camera image did not show Mara's body. It showed mine. At the bottom of her note, she had written, "The station does not move us into tomorrow. It makes a second observation of us there. Every transmitted report leaves an observer behind to confirm it. Do not look at that observer. Recognition completes the record." I had looked at the tower camera. At 11:30, the high-frequency radio came alive. "You saw him," Mara said. "One frame. Was it your face?" I closed it. "That isn't what I asked." I admitted I had not let the image load. She was quiet. "Then it may still be incomplete," she said. "When the comm begins, keep your eyes below the roofline. The observer will try to stand where you can identify him. Are you in the annex now?" "Tomorrow, yes." "Can we both get out?" Static filled the pause. "There are more than two of us here." Other voices emerged behind hers. Some spoke names. Some recited pressure values. One repeated a mayday call beneath a wash of old vacuum tube hum. A man identified himself as Foster, the former observer mentioned in Mara's notebook. Another gave the date February 2nd, 1964. All of them occupied the annex at different times. All believed the next comm would be their way out. Mara told me the correction required two actions. I had to remove the Saturday chart from the master drum before it reached the present pin. Then I had to break the pressure pipe connecting Annex K to the surface. "That pipe is the reference," she said. "As long as both stations measure the same air, one can verify the other across the interval." "What happens if I break it?" "K41 becomes one station at one time." "What happens to everyone in the other observations?" Foster answered from behind her. "We become missing data." At 2 o'clock in the morning, pressure began falling faster than the digital sensor could display it. The last connected analog gauge trembled against its lower stop. The storm outside lost all variation. Wind became one continuous force pressing from every direction. The building's sound separated under that pressure. Fasteners clicked inside the walls. The roof membrane snapped and settled. Ice moved across the windows in branching white veins. Every few minutes, the generator exhaust was forced backward through the vent, filling the utility room with the bitter edge of diesel before the fan cleared it. Visibility fell to the glass. The world beyond each window became a flat sheet of gray. I could no longer see the instrument shelter or even the porch railing. Yet the tower camera continued showing the full compound under pale moonlight. In its image, The storm did not exist. The tower figure stood above a clear black plateau, looking toward a horizon filled with stars. I unplugged the camera monitor. Its screen went dark, but the reflection remained. In the black glass, I could still see the figure at the top of the tower. I covered the monitor with Mara's notebook. The roof groaned. At 3:40, footsteps descended the tower. This time, they reached the plateau and walked directly to the southern window. The storm shutter was closed, but a narrow ventilation slot remained above it. Pale light entered through that gap. A shadow crossed the ceiling. It stopped above my desk. The person outside raised one arm. I saw the shadow of a gloved hand holding a sheet of paper. The paper's shadow showed the jagged line of a barograph chart. My own voice called through the wall. "Daniel, this is the last complete observation. You need to see it." I sat on the floor with my back against the pantry and watched the mechanical timer. At 4:19, every instrument alarm sounded at once. Temperature vanished from the console. Humidity read 0. The digital pressure display showed 4 dashes. The radio transmitted a column of numbers in my voice. The wind stopped at 4:20. The silence had weight. Without the storm, I could hear snow settling across the roof. I could hear the blood moving in my ears. I could hear somebody outside breathing against the southern window. The pantry hatch unlocked. I turned the wheel and went down. The ladder descended 28 feet through a shaft barely wider than my shoulders. Concrete gave way to rough black rock. Frost coated the rungs despite warm air rising from below. The pressure pipe ran beside me, a copper tube as thick as my wrist, fastened to the wall with iron brackets. I clipped my harness to a safety cable and lowered the pack. Above, the hatch framed a square of orange station light. A shadow crossed it. I kept climbing. At the bottom, the ladder ended on the roof of the original station. Annex K had not been a basement. It was the entire 1953 building buried beneath concrete and volcanic gravel. Its peaked metal roof sagged under the newer foundation. An access door had been cut through the roof and fitted with a short steel stair. Beyond it, my headlamp illuminated a room assembled from corrugated panels, plywood, and heavy timber braces. The air smelled of hot dust, machine oil, and ozone. Nothing was frozen. 4 observation desks stood against the walls. Each belonged to a different decade. One held vacuum tube radio equipment and a black telephone. Another held a green metal teletype. A beige computer terminal glowed beside a stack of 9-track tapes. The 4th desk was empty except for a modern handheld radio identical to mine. Every machine was operating. The teletype hammered out lines of coded weather. Vacuum tubes burned orange. Tape reels turned in slow opposing directions. The computer displayed a date in 1987. None had a visible power source. The master barograph occupied the center of the room. It was larger than Mara had described. The drum was 3 feet across and wrapped in a continuous sheet of paper fed from a roll beneath the floor. 4 brass arms reached toward it. Their pins drew in black, blue, red, and a colorless liquid visible only where the paper changed sheen. The black line marked Wednesday. Blue marked Thursday. Red traced Friday. The invisible pin had already begun Saturday. Above the instrument, 4 clocks showed the same time. 4:20. They had stopped at different seconds. My mechanical timer ticked in my pocket. 6 minutes, 32 seconds remained. Mara, my voice returned from the annex walls at several pitches. One of the desk chairs moved. A woman appeared beside the teletype as if she had stepped from behind a pane of dark glass. She wore a red station parka. Ice crusted her hair and one side of her face. I could see the room through her in brief flashes. Then she became solid enough to cast a shadow. "Do you see me?" she asked. "Yes. Only look once." I turned toward the barograph. Other people occupied the edges of the room. A man in a wool military sweater stood beside the vacuum radio. An observer in a yellow 1980s snowsuit leaned over the computer terminal. Two more shapes waited near the rear wall, their clothing changing whenever my headlamp crossed them. They were not ghosts. They displaced air. Their boots creaked on the floor, but each belonged to a separate observation of the room. Foster, the man by the radio, pointed at the paper roll. "Saturday chart is below the platen," he said. "Release lever on the eastern side." I found the lever beneath the rotating drum. It would not move. Mara reached for it. Her hand passed through the metal on the first attempt. On the second, she gripped it. We pulled together. The lever released with a crack. The drum lifted half an inch, and all 4 pins skated sideways. Instruments around the annex reacted. The teletype printed a solid column of symbols. Tape reels accelerated. The black telephone rang. I reached beneath the drum and found the leading edge of Saturday's paper. It was warm. The invisible line became visible against my skin, glowing pale where my fingers touched it. I saw pressure changes that had not occurred, storm fronts not yet formed, and 7 minutes of calm repeating at 24-hour intervals. Small tower shapes stood inside every calm. I pulled. The paper resisted as if the far end were fixed under great weight. Foster and the other observers gathered around the drum. Some became solid enough to help. Hands from 1964, 1987, 2014, and Thursday gripped the same future chart. Together, we tore it free. The clocks lost 1 second. All 4 ticked to 4 hours, 20 minutes, and 13 seconds. The annex lurched. The walls changed around us. For an instant, the room was new, its plywood clean and its metal bright. Then corrosion raced over every surface. The computer vanished. The teletype appeared in pieces. Snow pushed through seams and withdrew. My timer showed 4 minutes, 48 seconds. "The pipe," Mara said. It entered through the ceiling above the master barograph and descended into a brass manifold bolted to the floor. A glass gauge showed the surface pressure on one side and annex pressure on the other. Both needles pointed below zero. I fitted the pry bar behind the lowest bracket. The black telephone stopped ringing. I heard Halpern's voice through its earpiece. "Daniel, breaking that line will erase the lead observation." I ignored him and pulled. The iron bracket bent, but did not fail. "2 aircraft are routing through Kestrel Pass tomorrow," he continued. "Without the lead, they will enter the front blind." Mara seized the phone. "There are no aircraft," she said. "The pass has been closed since Wednesday." Halpern answered her by name. "You were instructed to remain in place until synchronization. You told Regional I was evacuated. Your surface observation was." Mara tore the cord from the telephone. Halpern's voice continued from the barograph case. He explained what the survey had done. After the 1964 failure, the government closed the lead program but preserved Annex K. Forecast models still ingested its future measurements through an isolated network. The data prevented crashes, warned of flash floods, and improved winter routing. Every few years, a storm advanced the surface station. An observer was lost to +1 day. The survey marked the file complete and waited for the dates to realign. "Most return," Halpern said. Foster laughed. He had been waiting 58 years. "If you break the reference," Halpern continued, "all unverified observations collapse to the last complete record." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means whoever is not synchronized may be removed with the data." Mara looked at the clocks. 3 minutes, 50 seconds remained. "Do it," she said. I pulled the pry bar again. The bracket snapped. The copper pipe flexed but held. Something struck the hatch above us. The ladder rang. One slow impact. Then another. My uncompleted observer was coming down. Mara braced the pipe while I wedged the bar behind the manifold. The older observers formed a line between us and the ladder shaft. Their bodies strengthened as the negative interval deepened. The climbing stopped at the bottom rung. Nobody looked up. Boots stepped onto the roof of Annex K. My voice spoke through the access door. The Saturday chart was the way back. I drove my weight onto the bar. The manifold cracked. Air did not escape. Sound did. Thousands of weather reports burst from the break at once. Temperatures, wind speeds, station identifiers, pilot warnings, and human voices filled the room in a pressure wave. Paper exploded from the teletype. The master barograph spun backward. The figure entered the annex. I saw only its boots beneath the instrument. My black insulated boots, the left toe marked by the same crescent-shaped cut. It carried a barograph chart in one hand. "Look at me," it said in my voice. "Confirm the observation." Foster stepped in front of it. For one moment, his 1964 body became perfectly solid. He wore a wool sweater, suspenders, and a silver service badge. He faced the figure so I did not have to. "Station K, 41, he said, "visibility 0. The figure reached for him. Mara shouted my name. I pushed the pry bar sideways. The copper pipe split. The master barograph stopped. Every pin lifted from the drum. The annex went silent. The invisible observers disappeared first. Foster remained long enough to nod once. Then his outline became a vertical fall of snow that vanished before reaching the floor. The figure in my boots stood on the opposite side of the barograph. I kept my eyes below its knees. It dropped the chart. On the paper, a pencil drawing showed me and Mara climbing the ladder. Above us, at the hatch, the tower figure waited. "That is the last complete record," it said. My timer showed 1 minute, 21 seconds. Mara grabbed my pack. We ran for the access steps. The figure did not follow. It moved to the observation desk and began reading instruments that no longer worked. I climbed first. Mara followed close enough that her headlamp threw my shadow up the shaft. The pressure pipe beside us had gone cold. At halfway, my timer rang. The comm had 30 seconds remaining. The square of light above showed the station pantry. Nothing blocked the opening. I reached the hatch and pulled myself through. Mara was 3 rungs below me. The wind returned. It hit the station like an explosion. The pantry door slammed. Shelves toppled across the floor. Snow blasted down the open shaft. The ladder twisted. Mara's hand slipped. I caught the shoulder of her parka and hauled upward. For a second, her body became transparent. My hand closed on empty fabric, then solid bone, then nothing again. Below her, the annex no longer existed. The shaft descended into black distance filled with moving stars. Several hands reached upward from different points in that dark. Some wore wool gloves. Some were bare. One carried a yellow sleeve. They pushed Mara toward me. I dragged her through the hatch at 4:27. The wheel spun closed by itself. Pressure returned to 691 millibars. Every clock in the station read Friday. Mara lay on the pantry floor, unconscious but breathing. Ice melted from her hair. The wall calendar had advanced to January 28th. My phone found a satellite and displayed the same date. The 2 stations were finally observing the same day. I called Coyle. He answered on the first transmission. "Daniel, where have you been?" "At K41. I've been calling for 2 days." I asked what his weather showed. The front had passed. Kestrel Pass was opening. He could reach us after sunrise. Before I told him about Mara, I looked toward the southern window. The storm shutter had fallen open. The tower stood against a clearing sky. The red obstruction light blinked. No one occupied the ladder or the upper platform. But a second set of my footprints crossed the plateau from the tower to the station door. They ended on the porch. I did not open it. Coyle landed at 8:40 Friday morning. He found Mara and me waiting beside the helicopter pad. She had no frostbite and no serious injuries, though according to regional records, she had been missing for 18 days. Nobody from the survey seemed surprised to see her. Halpern met us at the clinic. He separated us before taking statements. When I refused to sign an accident report, he put the 1964 binder on the table. Every page concerning Annex K was blank. Mara's field notebook was blank too. The only physical evidence was the crescent cut in my left boot and the chart drawn by the observer. I had folded it into my pack without looking at the picture again. Halpern asked for it. I tore it into 4 pieces and dropped them into the clinic sharps container. The survey closed K41 for the rest of that winter. In summer, a construction team removed the surface building, tower, fuel tanks, and foundation. Their final report said no underground structure existed. Satellite photographs now show bare black rock where the station stood. Mara left weather work. She moved east and teaches mathematics at a community college. We exchange a message every January 28th. Neither of us mentions Blackglass Plateau. I stayed in the field for another year, but I stopped trusting measurements the way I once had. A number can be precise and still be wrong about where it came from. A forecast can describe tomorrow because it understands the atmosphere, or because tomorrow has already been forced to report. 6 months after demolition, K41 reappeared on the public weather network. The listing had no map coordinates. It transmitted one observation each day at 4:20 in the morning. Wind, calm. Visibility, 0. Pressure, missing. The observer initials were DR. I reported it. The entry disappeared. The next morning, it returned with Saturday's date. That has continued for 3 years. Yesterday, the listing added a live camera image. It showed the empty Blackglass Plateau under moonlight. No station. No tower. Only a square hatch set into the rock and a line of footprints beginning in the middle of untouched snow. The footprints led toward the camera. At the bottom of the page, a new forecast discussion appeared under my name. It described a 7-minute calm expected across the entire Kestrel Range tomorrow morning. The text warned pilots to remain clear of the plateau. It told observers not to trust future timestamps. The final sentence was not written in forecast language. Daniel, it said, you broke the surface pipe. The lower station is still measuring. This morning, the barometer in my apartment began drawing a line. I do not own a barometer. This has been the Ashen Frequency. Until the next transmission, keep one light on.